a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Coffee comes in many sizes. The best size is gigantic. I have a coffee cup that holds something like 25 ounces. I don't use it much because it doesn't set well on my desk. Kind of too big. Organic Man Coffee Trike has lots of coffee and you can get it in lots of sizes, but only one shape. Liquid. 4501 McPherson is home to the best coffee in the universe, and they're easy to get to. If you don't live in Laredo, go to organicmancoffeetrike.shop and find out what real coffee tastes like. I see Vic has put out another show, and Annabelle Lee was on this time. That means I don't have to worry about her hanging out in my studio. If you want to listen, check out Trailer Trash Terrors and see what another podcast sounds like. It's pretty good. I enjoy it. Lots of weird voices going on. A mimic is something that pretends to be something else for either survival reasons or to prey on others. For example, black water served in a cup pretending to be coffee. You find this at a lot of restaurants. Bugs do a great job of looking like other things. They look like leaves or sticks. Sometimes they look like snakes. Some snakes try to look like other snakes. The gopher snake will flatten its head and then shake its tail, curled up in a coil, trying to look like a rattlesnake. Other creatures see this and they think, oh my God, it's a rattlesnake, when in reality, the gopher snake doesn't have any venom. Any predator is going to think twice about trying him as a meal. During World War II, Germany used auxiliary cruisers to sneak up on unsuspecting freighters and capture them. To do this, these cruisers had flags from every nation, and they had supplies so they could change their silhouette, make themselves look like other ships. They even had uniforms so they could disguise the crew. One form of mimic is trying to live while the other are a bunch of pirates. Both took on the likeness of something they weren't. At the LPRS, we have a video of what looks like an airplane flying over Nuevo Laredo. As it's moving, the wings fade from view, followed by the tail. The plane takes on more of a disc shape as it disappears from sight over town. How is this accomplished is just as big a mystery as are there really flying saucers out there? Over the years, I've heard and read about some encounters that sound very much mimic like. One story I found was told by Nancy, not her real name, who said when she was 5 years old, she was playing by the edge of the woods behind her grandmother's house. Something caught her eye up in a tree. Nancy described it as looking like a heat wave coming off the branch of the tree. That shimmer you see when gazing out over hot terrain. As she stared, the shimmer took on the size and the shape of a man. Being five, Nancy figured this was an invisible man sitting on one of the branches. It creeped her out, but she didn't know what to do. Finally, she ran inside, but she decided she wasn't going to tell anybody because, well, she didn't believe it herself. About 7 or 8 years later, Nancy was watching TV and the movie Predator came on. As the creature used its cloaking device, the image on the set looked exactly like what she had seen sitting up in that tree. She asked her dad if the predator being was real, but he said, nah, this is just a movie. With time, other people have told of seeing something predator like in various locations. The expanded perspectives guys call these glimmermen. Years later, Nancy was up late one night and stepped outside for a smoke. Cam and Kyle, or maybe both, have asked on a few occasions why people go outside to smoke and then they see things. I used to smoke, and when you lit up, you were usually just standing or sitting and not doing anything else. You would glance up at the sky or look around at the turf, but your mind was kind of cleared. You were letting the nicotine do its thing. Smoke 'em if you got 'em. The Army used to encourage people to smoke since cigarettes came in C rations. They were 50 cents a pack back when I went through basic. Nancy stepped out for a smoke, and as she stood there, she heard a clicking sound. She glanced around the yard and spotted that pixelated form once more up in a tree. The same not quite invisible thing Nancy had seen when she was five. It was like a distortion of a human shape. She could make out the head and the torso. The arms were stretched out, holding the trunk. Nancy began to suspect this thing was stalking her, possibly with bad intent. Kind of like Aqualung. Some of y'all get that one. This was too much, and Nancy bolted for the door. Once inside, she went around checking all the doors and windows to make sure everything was locked. Once the house was secured, Nancy looked out a few windows to see if this thing was moving any closer. She didn't see anything, but the neighbor's dog did. It came running from their yard and began barking and growling at the tree where Nancy had seen the creature. Its attention was in the same location where the creature had been sitting. This went on too long before the dog kind of lost interest. The creature must have somehow left without showing any more of itself. Nancy spent a restless night, and the next few nights weren't much better. The invisible man had left her alone from that time on. This makes me wonder, are these weird creatures all over the place? Only certain folks can see them? Or do these creatures allow people to see them to scare and feed on the energy? Fear feeders are a subject all on their own. Two teens were out walking along a gravel road. Bob and Mark, also not their real names. They weren't identified in the story. Neither was the time, the date, or the location. The road ran past several fields, and on occasion there were a few wooded areas. As they were passing one of these small wooded areas, the brush began to shake violently. A cat shot out from the tree line as if being pursued by Alf. In 1986, ALF, an acronym for alien life form, crash landed in the garage of a suburban California middle class family. Alf pursues the family cat, Lucky, hoping to make a meal out of him. Here, kitty, kitty. As far as I know, Alf never managed to eat any of the cats, but he was always trying to. That was a weird TV show from back when things were still kind of funny on TV. Bob and Mark both looked into the dark, trying to see what had chased the cat. Standing still and intently listening, the boys heard the sound of huge footsteps moving through the dark. One footfall followed by another. They both said it was like an elephant was walking on two legs, but they saw nothing. As they strained to see, dust could be seen being stirred up by something. A puff of dust, and then another, about 6 feet apart. As folks heard the story, they speculated there must have been some invisible creature walking around that area. Either that, or the two boys were lying. A few thought about the Glimmer Man stories, and they figured maybe this is what had been in the woods. These stories involve unseen beings. This would be a form of mimicry, changing their image to match the background. In the Philippines, they have a legend of a creature known as the Ek Ek. This thing is half man, half bat. It flies about in the dark looking for its next meal. Anyone out at night on some lonely road will do. The Ek Ek is a vampire looking to drain people of their blood. On occasion, the Ek Ek is described as looking more like a bird than a bat, half bird, half man. It has feathers and a beak jutting out from a human looking face. A few say it looks more like just simply a giant bird. As people reported sightings, the descriptions got a bit muddled. The creature was a cross between a bat and a bird, with a few human features mixed in. Nobody went as far as to say maybe there's more than one creature out there being seen, and folks are just calling them all by the same name. Not all Ek attacks are to drink blood. A few say the creature will rip the flesh from its victims and eat it. Add the ability to shapeshift, and this being is true monster. It has a preference for solitary wanderers, luring them with a beguiling allure in the guise of a seductive female, leading men into the depths of the forest where it exerts an eerie control until the sun goes down. Under the cloak of darkness, the Ek Ek reveals its true form, killing its victim by draining the blood or eating them. Ek Ek are also known to target pregnant women as they sleep. It uses its elongated proboscis to reach into the womb and drain the fetus's blood, killing it in the process. During these gruesome attacks, the creature makes a distinctive ek, ek, ek sound. The Ek Ek emits a faint sounding noise, which makes people believe that it's farther away than it actually is. Ek Ek are often depicted as having feathers that cover parts of their body. These feathers extend from their wings to encompass their arms and legs, creating a seamless blend of humanoid features with feathers on it. Their faces may bear a resemblance to a bird's, with beak and sharp features, or they may look like a human, but with a beak, sometimes with a long, pointy beak like a, uh, darn it, Lost what I was going to say, like a woodpecker. I was thinking woodpecker and roadrunner at the same time. Well, they both have a pointy beak. Ekek are always depicted as being nocturnal beings shrouded in mystery and secrecy. They are known to dwell in distant, concealed locations, favoring the darkness over the daylight. The Ekek is called a vampire or a werewolf, depending on whether it drinks blood or eats flesh. Either way, they fly around at night looking for dinner. Ekek are also able to transform into small lizards or bats. In this form, they sleep during the day. Once you spot one, you can try to cast a spell on it, and then the creature will be unable to attack that night or the next couple of nights because it's bound by the spell. However, some Ekeks can cast their own magical spells that protect them from the human spells. Kind of a counter spell, if you will. In order to lure people away from safety, the Ekek can imitate human voices, especially children. They will emit the sound of a child crying for help. As the would-be rescuer moves farther into the woods, the creature waits until the right moment to spring its trap. It is said when the gods created our world, they used various spirits, werewolves, vampires, and other nasty beings, in order to balance the good with evil. Kind of the old yin yang thing. Residents of the Philippines are convinced this creature continues to prey on humans even today. And to add to the weirdness, they've been seen in towns and cities as well. The idea of any kind of a being that can impersonate someone is pretty disturbing. Like that episode of Coal Shack, The Night Stalker, Horror in the Heights. The Rakshasa takes on the appearance of somebody trusted by its victims. Hindu folklore tell of the Rakshasa, a demonic being that assumes the shape of various animals in order to trick humans. The Rakshasa, in their natural form, are said to have huge fangs, long claws instead of fingernails. They're half monster, half human, and they just enjoy eating human flesh. In Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, it is believed that a race of people called Naga exist. These entities are half mortal and half godlike, and reside in the netherworld. Their natural forms are half human and half serpent, but it is believed they have the ability to assume the shape of an ordinary human at will. Mimics represent one of the most unusual paranormal phenomenon. These supernatural beings utilize voice mimicry in order to deceive their victims, or they can change their shape to look like either another person or some other animal, something not dangerous. Sometimes when they do impersonate a person's voice, they're able to sound like that person. Not only that, but sometimes they know the names of their victims. They'll call them by name, asking them to come into the woods. Either they need help or they want to show them something. The question that comes to my mind is, how do these creatures know what a trusted friend or family member sounds or looks like? They must have the ability to read our minds, to draw out this information, which makes them even more unnerving. Either that or they're fuddling our minds. I like that word, fuddle. to confuse or stupefy. Put it into your list of words that you're going to use from now on. Fuddle. Researchers classify mimics as shape-shifting creatures that demonstrate sophisticated audio and visual replication abilities, making them amongst the most deceptive entities in the supernatural world. Creatures that can mimic are many. Yes, my mouth is not working. Maybe I need more coffee. Hmm. Creatures that can mimic are many. The Wendigo can make sounds like a baby crying. The Lechuza does the same thing. People have reported hearing somebody calling for help. As they move towards the calls, the voice seems to move farther away. Ghouls can take on the appearance of those they have recently eaten. These beings eat the dead. But if there aren't any fresh bodies around, they're not opposed to making a fresh one. In other words, they'll kill people so they can eat them. These supernatural impersonators can take on the forms of ghosts, demons, or cryptids, and are reported worldwide in both ancient folklore as well as modern encounters. Mimics are paranormal beings that imitate or copy traits, behaviors, appearance of living beings, and sometimes other supernatural entities. These voice copying creatures, audio impersonators, and supernatural mimics represent a broad category of phenomena that spans multiple entity types. Unlike regular ghosts, mimics use their ability to deceive and manipulate their targets. These entities don't randomly produce sounds or appearances. Instead, they reproduce familiar voices to create an emotional response in their victims. They often call victims by name and mimics the exact tone and inflection of the person you trust. Unless somebody in your group is using your name, how do they know these things? Paranormal researchers document consistent mimicry behavior patterns in different cultures. The entities typically target isolated individuals, people that have walked away from the group, or those that are bold enough to be doing investigations on their own, which is not a really good idea. If something happens, well, you're pretty much out of luck. They're found all over the world. They've been reported in forests, abandoned buildings, deep inside caves, and even in some modern environments, places like sports arenas and places like that, theaters, people's homes, grocery stores. I've heard stories from some of my listeners where they've seen a close friend of theirs while shopping, only to find out that that person isn't even in town. Some forms of mimics demonstrate shape-shifting abilities, physical manifestations, and environmental manipulation so they can enhance their deceptions. Some witnesses report seeing familiar figures in their peripheral vision, just like right about here, and when you turn to look, there's no one there. These things have been reported way back in history. The doppelganger is a form of mimic that replicates living people's appearances and behavior. I've heard from many witnesses who have had encounters with doppelgangers. The word doppelganger is German, which means double goer or double walker. While the German terminology is relatively recent, the doppelganger appears to be a long time subject throughout history. It just didn't have a name until the Germans gave it one. Kind of like how people talk about the rake. Oh, the rake was invented on creepy pasta back a couple of years ago. No, the name rake was invented a few years ago. The creature itself has been reported for thousands of years. It's only recently been named. Doppelgangers fall into three basic categories. There's the death omen doppelganger, which will appear in the night usually during a wartime period. When a soldier is killed in battle, their relative will wake in the middle of the night to see this person standing at the foot of their bed. And the sighting almost always takes place at the exact moment that the person is killed. Doesn't necessarily have to be a soldier. It can also be someone killed in a car accident or somebody killed, say, by murder. Somebody who dies a violent death. Suddenly, their spirit, or perhaps a spirit that is mimicking them, will appear to one of the relatives. Uh, Living person doubles occur when somebody's doppelganger appears while they're still alive, typically indicating impending danger or significant life changes. At least that's what the researchers have said. Now, I have met a few people who have had doppelganger reports. As far as we could tell, nothing bad ever happened. A friend of mine was up in San Antonio. When he got back home, one of his friends has said, "Hey, I saw you at a store here in town, and he waved at you, and you just ignored me." And the guy said, "That's impossible. I was in San Antonio at that time." We thought about it and thought about it, but we couldn't come up with anything bad that happened any time thereafter. Doppelgangers sometimes appear to be slightly unsubstantial, a little bit faded, or maybe they lack some of the typical weight of a normal human being. It's almost as if you can almost see through them, or as if their outline isn't really solid. However, on some occasions, the doppelganger has looked completely realistic and thoroughly like the person they're imitating. They rarely speak to anyone. They'll appear and sometimes wave at the person that they're trying to entice to follow them, or they'll simply stand there staring at the person for a few seconds and then step to the side behind something and disappear. I haven't had too many reports of doppelgangers actually speaking. They almost always are just seen. Celtic folklore describes similar entities called a fetch or a fetch life that appear as death omens, with the disturbing belief that seeing a fetch at night means the person who is being imitated is about to die. The only way to keep the person alive once you've seen a fetch is to keep the fireplace burning. Now, they didn't say for how long, just that it has to be kept alight. The most unsettling variation involves individuals who wake in the night to find a corpse like fetch laying in bed with them. This represents immediate death omen. Ghost mimics typically manifest as spirits attempting to communicate or seek attention, though they can also appear as death omens. These spectral voices or visions uh, try to communicate with humans. They call to them. They mimic. the voices of people. Maybe not somebody you know, maybe a stranger, but either way, they sound very human like. Ghost mimics very seldom demonstrate malicious intent, though their attempts at communication can be somewhat unsettling. That doesn't mean they're not going to try something nasty. It just means that they don't look like they're going to do anything bad. Demonic impersonation represents the dangerous side of mimicry. These malevolent entities, spiritual deceivers, if you will, or infernal creatures, use voice mimicry as a hunting tool, specifically designed to lead victims astray. Ancient texts describe demons mimicking angels, loved ones, authority figures, in order to draw their victim into an isolated location where they can do their nastiness. Mimic demons possess the unique ability to copy not only voices and appearance, but the supernatural abilities of other entities that they encounter. Religious scholars identify demonic mimics through their consistent deceptive patterns and their capacity to feed on fear and negative emotions. Energy vampires of a sort. These entities exploit trust, manipulate emotions, and corrupt relationships through their supernatural voice replication abilities. They often target individuals during vulnerable moments, such as right after a family member has died. They'll appear to them as if this person has come to visit, while at the same time, it's actually a demon there for nastiness. The motivation behind demonic mimicry centers on manipulation, deception, and harvesting fear energy from their victims. Cryptid mimics operate as unknown creatures using voice or visual replication. The crocota, wendigo, and similar voice copying creatures represent physical beings that evolved or developed supernatural vocal ability. These entities inhabit wilderness areas, target travelers, and use mimicry for predatory purposes. The Cherokee raven mocker stands out as one of the most documented cryptid mimics in Indian folklore. These shape-shifting witches can appear as elderly people, ravens, or invisible forms so they can feed without being seen. They announce their presence through imitated raven calls before attacking the sick and elderly, consuming their hearts to extend their own lives by however long their victim was going to live. So if your grandfather was going to live another 10 years and he's attacked by the raven mocker will get those extra 10 years to live and not your grandfather. The raven mocker looks bird like. It's a shapeshifter with black feathers and white eyes. It stands over 7 feet tall, and most sightings of this creature have been in Virginia. My nephew had better keep his eyes out for 7 foot tall birds. If somebody sees it, it's considered to be a bad omen. Tragedy will soon affect the viewer's life. The raven mocker can make itself look like a normal human, which allows it to get closer to people. It does this in order to eat a person's heart, which it does without having to cause any discernible physical trauma. It doesn't have to punch a hole through the victim's chest in order to do its nastiness. It usually preys on people who are dying or sick, and it's It's just one of those things you got to watch out for. It has no conscience. It does what it does because that's how it is. Sometimes it just consumes the essence of the dying without taking their hearts. It goes after the dying so that it can strengthen its life force and continue living. Navajo skinwalkers represent another category of cryptid mimic, though their abilities extend far beyond voice copying. These shapeshifters can transform into various animals while retaining the ability to mimic human voices for deception and harm. Cryptozoologists document mimic creatures across multiple ecosystems throughout the world. These forest dwellers, wilderness predators, and unknown species demonstrate remarkable intelligence in their ability to mimic a voice, often studying their potential victims for days before attempting to lure them using perfectly replicated family member voices. Reports describe entities utilizing the phone system, digital communication, and electronic devices to extend their reach beyond traditional face to face encounters. Great. These creatures have learned how to use telephones and computers. Mimics encounter span Mimic encounters span centuries of folklore and cultural records. These documented experiences provide evidence that mimic phenomenon represents consistent supernatural activity across unconnected cultures, time, and periods. This story took place several years ago, beginning in Cuesa, Mexico, a little town about 16 miles southeast of Guadalajara, Jalisco. For those of you that didn't know this, old cars used to be called jalopies. Where did they get that name, you might ask? Way, way, way back, whenever these cars were no longer considered usable, they would load them up on a ship and send them south. And a lot of these cars were going to Jalisco. In order to show the people loading the ship where these cars were supposed to go, they would paint JL, JAL on the side of the ship, Jalisco. Well, somebody took the JAL and they just added a couple of letters to the end. They spelled jalopy. And from that time on, old beat up cars were known as jalopies. And now you know. Now back to the story out of Mexico. Alejandra was in the kitchen washing the dishes after dinner. Hey, this was back when kids used to have chores. It wasn't go watch TV while the adults did all the cleaning. No, you got to watch TV after the chores were done. Okay, now I'm ranting. Alejandra was in the kitchen washing the dishes after dinner. Her younger sister, Sarah, was out playing in the garden. She was too young to have chores at the time. It was getting dark outside, so Alejandra yelled at Sarah to come back inside. Her sister didn't do so. She was ignoring her. They lived in a small house, and the garden wasn't all that big. Sarah should have heard her name being called. Alejandra heard footsteps coming up behind her. She turned around, and there was her sister, Sarah, standing behind her. She turned and looked back out the window. There was Sarah, still out in the garden. Well, now, her sister was looking out the window as well, and they both could see this other Sarah looking back at them. The longer they stared at each other, the more they could tell that this other Sarah looked identical. But she was a little bit pale looking, just a little bit sickly looking. As the sisters continued to stare, the outside Sarah slowly began to smile at them. Well, this creeped Alejandra out. She grabbed her sister, and the two girls ran through the house to their parents' room, where they both kind of hid in a corner, waiting for their folks to get back home. Years later, Sarah grew up, and she moved to the U.S. I hope she came legally. She got married and had 3 kids of her own. Her children said that often times late at night, Sarah would walk into the room, stand there staring at the kids for a few seconds, and then turn and leave without saying anything. On other occasions, they would hear her calling their names, even when they knew their mother wasn't home. One time, her children were watching TV while Sarah was at work. As 2 of them were sitting on the couch in the living room watching TV, the door flew open. It was Sarah, only something seemed a bit off. She looked around the room and then said, "Where's your other sister?" Well, one of the kids said, "She's in her room." Sarah said, "Okay." She turned, stepped back out the door, slammed it, and left. Several hours later, Sarah came home again, and her kids asked her why she had come back home earlier. Sarah told her kids that she hadn't come back home earlier. They insisted she had been there. After some thought, that original incident from back in Mexico came to mind. Had her doppelganger followed her into the U.S.? And if so, why? As far as we know, nothing bad ever came of this incident, but it did happen. Michael said when he was 4 years old, something would come and visit him. He was laying in his bed asleep when he would hear his mother calling his name. Michael would look out at the door, and there she stood, just outside his room, looking in. Instead of coming any closer, his mother would turn and walk away. Michael said he was too tired to think anything of it, so he just went back to sleep. A few hours later, the same thing happened again. He heard his mother calling his name. Michael looked over at the door, and this time he noticed the thing he was looking at that he thought was his mother didn't have a face. Well, this elicited an immediate response. He screamed for bloody murder and then hid under the blankets. If you can't see them, the monsters can't see you. A weird thing used to happen back when I worked for a living. We would be walking around along the riverbank, knowing that there were some aliens in the area, and we would find 1 or 2 of them hiding in the bushes. They would have their eyes shut. You'd walk up to them, put your flashlight on them, say, "Hey, come on, let's go. Taking you back to Mexico." They would just sit there with their eyes shut. They wouldn't move. You would have to physically reach out and poke them in the arm and tell them, "Come on, let's go. You're caught." Once you touched them, then they would acknowledge your presence. As long as they couldn't see you, you didn't exist. Weird phenomenon. And yet I saw it hundreds of times. Back to Michael. This other mother, yes, I saw that movie and I read the book. In fact, I saw the movie 3 times now. It was pretty cool. I liked it. Oh, okay. Michael's other mother kept showing up in the middle of the night. Instead of answering her calls, Michael would scream for his real mother and then hide under the blankets. This was getting a little annoying, so his mother put a motion activated camera just outside his room. The idea being Michael would see there was nothing there to be scared of. Late one night, Michael yelled for his mother. She went and looked at him hiding under the covers. She went and she looked at the camera, going to prove to him it was just a bad dream. This was when she realized the camera had been activated by something. It had come on and filmed for a few seconds before Michael had sat up in bed screaming, showing nothing. I could not find the conclusion to this story. It ended with the camera. Did they move to a new location? Did they have a priest come in and bless the house? They didn't say. I hear people say if you encounter your own doppelganger, you're going to die. I don't know how they came to this conclusion, but I don't want to find out either. I don't even know if I have a doppelganger out there somewhere. Maybe. I've had a few people ask me if I was somewhere where I wasn't. I do know that I have a twin person out there. I met him when I was in Houston. He was also in the Border Patrol. We were on a detail together. His first name was John. His last name started with an F. We looked so much alike that if we were standing side by side, people would come up and ask us if we were twins, if we were brothers. I would have people come up and start telling me something that our unit needed to do, only to realize that I was not the supervisor. He was standing over on the other side of the room. Yet we looked almost exactly the same. Weird thing. Jessica was home after school while her mother was still at work. Some folks have issues with this, but single parents that have scruples and morals get jobs and provide for their families. They don't expect others to shell out money so that they don't have to work. Okay, now I'm ranting again. Jessica was at home alone while her mother was away at work. Her mother would usually get home at about 6 o'clock in the morning. At around 4 o'clock, somebody began pounding on the front door. Jessica awoke, but she was afraid to go look. The pounding was followed by a voice yelling for her to open the door. It sounded like her mother, but it wasn't quite right. Jessica was the only one in the house, and she was too terrified to go look. The knocking continued, and she heard her, not mother, asking if she was in there and to open the door. It sounded so much like her mother's voice, but the wording was all wrong. She was using words that her mother wouldn't use. Open this portal immediately, something like that, as if somebody were imitating her mother's voice. Jessica, not knowing what to do, yelled at the person or thing on the other side of the door to go away. The the banging continued. Then it was followed by a growling sound. This was not a person. It was some kind of a monster. At her wit's end, Jessica grabbed the phone and she called the neighbors and asked if they could come get her. The neighbors arrived and Jessica went over to spend the rest of the night with them. There was no sign of anyone trying to get in, and her mother had the neighbors take care of Jessica for the next couple of nights. The event never happened again. One of the best examples of mimicry comes from the 1840s. In 1845, Emily Sagi was a 30-something school teacher from France. She was hired at an elite girls' school in Riga, Latvia. Emily was bright, well mannered, and very good at her job, but she had a bit of a bad reputation. It started when the students began noticing they would see Emily in one end of the school when she was actually at the other end of the school. Kids would say they saw their teacher in the library while she was actually teaching in one of the classes. Sometimes they would see her walk by the window while at the same time Emily was standing at the front of the room. People do talk, and the more people saw of Emily, the more the stories got around. One afternoon, during a lesson, Emily was at the blackboard writing. Nothing odd about that. How many of y'all remember blackboards? Huge piece of black slate, and you'd use a piece of white chalk to write on them. Sometimes the chalk would grate against the board. It'd make this horrendous screeching noise. Or if the teacher was one of those folks, she would take her fingernails and drag 'em down the blackboard. Makes my nerves crawl just thinking about it. Okay, Emily was at the board writing when people noticed that there was a second her standing right next to her, also moving her arm as if writing on the blackboard, except there was no chalk. The twin moved exactly like her. Emily didn't even seem to notice this double standing next to her. One day, while her class was being taught by another teacher, Emily decided to spend some time in the garden, unwind, have some personal time away from the kids so she didn't have to kill them. If you are married to a teacher, or if you are a teacher, you'll understand this. I hear some stories all the time. Teacher, 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 teach. Mm, they shouldn't have so many kids in one room, but that's the way it is. Anyway, so Emily is out in the garden. The teacher that is teaching them gets up and steps out of the room for a second. As soon as the teacher is out of the room, Emily appeared sitting at her desk. The students all looked at Emily at her desk, and then they looked out the window, and there was Emily in the garden. One of the braver students approached the phantom and tried touching her. Her hand passed right through the apparition. A few seconds later, the second Emily, the mimic, vanished. Outside in the garden, the real Emily continued on as if nothing had happened. Emily's phantom twin kept showing up with increasing bizarre uh, times. Students saw it standing silently behind her as she would sit at her desk. It would sometimes linger near her desk, even when Emily wasn't in the room. When she was feeling tired or weak, the double would seem a lot more solid, as if it were drawing energy away from her. Once during a sewing lesson, they used to teach things like this in school back when we had shop class. Any of y'all remember that? You could actually learn a skill before you get out of high school. Oh well. Home ec, sewing, typing, mechanics class. I took a drafting class in high school. It was fun. Unfortunately, they canceled it the next year because only 6 students had signed up for the class. Hmm. Did you know that, well, Roger Waters had been in college learning to be an architect? It's a good thing he decided to become a musician instead. Okay, Emily. Her class was having a sewing lesson. Emily wasn't in the room when she suddenly began to feel very tired and weak. The substitute Emily seemed to grow almost solid. Emily never saw her double. She only knew about it because she kept hearing about it from the students and fellow teachers. They claimed it was always just a few feet away from her, copying her every move and then fading away. The most popular theory, a lot of people say, is bilocation, a psychic ability to be in two places at once. It's rare, but there are stories of saints, mystics, and monks being able to experience this way back over the centuries. Another idea is that Emily was unknowingly creating a copy of herself, a tulpa of sorts, like an energy based clone. Some paranormal researchers believe certain people can project thought forms that briefly become visible to others. It would be so cool if this phantom other, if you could see through their eyes or hear what they're hearing. Oh, well, that would be a heck of a thing to have. According to records, Emily was fired from 19 different schools before that last one in Riga. Parents would complain about their students, their kids, talking about the weird things going on around their teacher. Eventually, Emily left the school in Riga, and there are no more reports of what happened to her after that. But if you look her up, you can find a lot of reports of this. The the Jirak is an Inuit shapeshifter that assumes many forms. The Jirak is very elusive and impossible to see if you attempt to look directly at it. You will only see the Jirak in your peripheral vision. These eerie beings can occasionally be helpful to hunters that stumble upon them, or they can be dangerously manipulative to a fatal extent. The Jirak are also known for slipping into family dwellings at night, kidnapping children, and then abandoning them out in the middle of nowhere. Some kind of a weird, fun thing they like to do. The kumiho is a fox that possesses the ability to take on the shape of any human that it likes. Stories of the kumiho are prevalent in China, Japan, and Korea, but the animal is considered friendly in China and Japan. In Korea, the creature is considered to be evil. Wanting to be fully human, this nine-tailed fox will often assume the shape of a good-looking female, a good-looking female, and use her charms and wiles to seduce young men. Once the man has found himself in the arms of the kumiho, she will rip out his heart and eat it, believing that this will let her become a human. Another variation claims that the kumiho will eat the human's liver instead. Once she has consumed either 100 hearts or 100 livers, she will become a human being. One of the better known mimics is the werewolf, a human that takes on the appearance and the abilities of a wolf. The folks who encounter dogmen might be seeing a werewolf, or maybe it's something else. A race of beings that look half dog and half human all the time. If such a race were running around our world, they must be from an alternate dimension, or they would have been seen a lot more often by a lot more people. The name not deer implies that this creature is not a deer, even though it looks like one. People have reported encountering these creatures, believing it was simply a deer, only to be amazed and somewhat horrified when the not deer does something not deer like, such as walking on two legs. They also say that the not deer sometimes doesn't look right. They describe it as looking like a very bad representation of a deer, and that the eyes are usually both in the facing portion of the skull as opposed to on the sides. Predators have forward looking vision, whereas the rest of the animals, their eyeballs are to the sides. Most sightings of the knot deer are in Pennsylvania, Virginia, John, watch out for the knot deer, and North Carolina. Many others have reported encounters with the knot deers in other parts of the Appalachian Mountains. People who have seen not deer say that the beast may appear to be a deer at first until they realize that things just don't look right with this thing. It's described as being somewhat demonic looking. A few witnesses have said that the not deer is like a really bad drawing of a deer that was done by somebody that had never actually seen one. One person is telling them what a deer looks like, and the other person is trying to draw it. Not deer are also said to behave very strangely. If you see a herd of deer and you start walking towards them, they will run away. However, the not deer sometimes will start moving towards you. Some researchers have found accounts of weird looking not deer going way back into the Indian legends. These stories started with the Native American tribes that once inhabited the Appalachian regions. Some folks have suggested that the not deer is a modern name for the Navajo skinwalker. In Navajo folklore, skinwalkers are practitioners of witchcraft who are able to shapeshift, transforming themselves into any creature that they like, except for sheep. For some odd reason, they can't impersonate sheep. The Navajo live in the Four Corners area, whereas the not deer sightings are all in the Appalachians. This is where the Cherokee lived. Ever since the Skinwalker TV show got famous, the Skinwalkers have become the monster du jour, the monster of the week. People in Europe have been talking about Skinwalkers. Now, they might be like Skinwalkers, but they're not Skinwalkers because they're not Navajo. If a not deer is cryptid as some kind of a creature modern science refuses to look into because they're just too weird, or could they be some entity trying to take on the appearance of a deer and move about unobserved? Good camouflage can make you blend in with the surrounding terrain, or it can make people simply ignore you, like the trash bag duende that they talk about on Expanded Perspectives. Why so many weird cryptids scattered about the country? Oh, the world for that matter. Could there be some connection amongst them, or are these all distinct beings that just happen to have some similar activity? Could it be the folks making the sightings are so freaked out they see more bizarre details than are actually there? Or do these creatures change their appearances based on the person making the sighting? It's like when somebody is trying to describe a sighting and they say it looked like a half lizard, half man. The naysayers will jump up and down yelling that lizards and men cannot mate, therefore this report is nonsense. The witness never said it was half man, half lizard, only that it looked like a half man, half lizard. As for the mimics, this whole different form of creepy. There are too many things out there that can fool people into thinking that somebody's in trouble. usually a small child. Folks do tend to rush to the aid of children, no matter what dangers might lurk in the dark. Some ghost investigators, seeing a little girl, and ask, how can they help? The not ghost says something about, oh, maybe she wants to contact her parents or a relative, asking to speak through the investigator. At no time should you ever allow any spirit or entity to take over your body, not even a finger. That's why Ouija boards are so dangerous. Once in control, you'll never get rid of them, unless you want to go through that whole Father Karras routine. Seeing as the boys in the white lab coat refuse to look anything not approved by their overlords, mimics and other unknown beings will remain hidden in the shadows, doing what they will. People will continue having encounters with weird beings, only to keep these events to themselves because they don't want all of the ridicule from those people. If you enjoyed tonight's show, if you did, spread it around. Send it to other people. Share it. Share it on YouTube. Share it on whatever platform you're listening on. If you didn't like the show, why are you still listening? Until next time, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.